our public works is going to be out of state on one of those dates. All right, it's 5 o'clock and we do have a quorum of this board, so I'd like to call this regular meeting of the Board of Finance to order. For the record, today is Tuesday, February 20th, 2024. And participating in person in the City Hall auditorium, we have Board Member Pesky, Board Member Traub, and Board Member Wright. And participating via Zoom, we have Mr. Bass. So there's our quorum. If we could all please pledge the flag before we open the meeting. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice. All right, and let the record reflect that Ms. Iannacito is also present and in person. We'll jump right into the meeting. Item number 1, I'll entertain. There is no public. Is there somebody hiding behind the podium? Since there is no public here, I think we can skip over 1 and move right into item number 2. I'll entertain a motion to accept the regular meeting minutes from January 16th, 2024.
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Wright.
Second.
Seconded by Ms. Pesky. Questions or comments on the minutes? Seeing none. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Item 3, I'll entertain a motion to accept the performance reports for the City of Torrington.
So moved.
Thank you, Mrs. Traub.
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Wright. And I should, just for the record, indicate these budget performance reports are through December 31st, correct? All right. All right, so questions or comments on the performance report? Hearing none. I'll call all in favor.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Item number 4, likewise, I'll entertain a motion to accept the Board of Education performance reports for January 2024.
So moved.
Thank you, Ms. Pesky.
Second.
Second by Mr. Bass. Questions or comments on this performance report?
There's no one here from the Board of Ed.
There is not. So today was a professional development day for the teachers. And the superintendent was in the schools. And I believe that because of the snow last week, the Board of Education was supposed to do their budget meeting this evening. So they're not available for their capital presentation. There's also a request for the closeout of fiscal year 23 to transfer funds into capital reserve. So we're going to go back at it and see if we can get them here in March.
So should we keep questions about this performance report until next meeting? Or ask you and you can check with them?
We can certainly do that. If there are questions you want to get on the record, and I can forward the questions to them and bring them.
There's several lines that are close to being fully expended. And some of them obviously are encumbered. So that makes sense. But there are tutoring, which is over budget and over expended. So, a few things like that. That was kind of odd for that to be so over expended at this point in the year. Theirs went through, if I'm correct, I think it was January 31st. Is theirs?
Theirs is. So
Okay.
their report was a roll-up account through January 31st. And do you have
The one that really jumped out to me was that tutoring. Special ed tutoring.
being here a surplus? 23, yeah.
Yeah, so they had a budget of 7,000 and the year-to-date transactions are 15,000.
Line item, please. I'm sorry.
This is on
That's
page
page
2
2 of their 5.
Right on that,
and 5121.
at the top.
Okay.
I mean, in the scheme of their whole budget, it's not huge. I understand that. But there wasn't any explanation that came along with it in terms of any that were over expended or close to being totally encumbered.
All right, so what I can do is, when we get them in the books for the March meeting for this purpose, I think likewise, the other line item that will probably need some explanation is their health and life insurance.
Insurance,
Yes.
yes.
That one also.
That same special ed line, Laureen, the prior year, was that a budget of 29,000 and some change? Or was that the actual expenditure?
Looks like
And-
the actual
and
expenditure.
If they spent 29, why were they only budgeting 15? What happened? That would be the question I want to know. Did they underestimate it, or did something happen that they needed more tutors?
Yeah, those are questions. And as I've said a few times, particularly post-budget adoption last year, there's never really been cast in stone procedures for this board to receive these budget performance reports and review them. For once the budget is adopted, requesting the respective boards, the city side and the Board of Ed side, to come back and show us where did you make those cuts and what is your final amended budget. So I do want to memorialize into a policy, because I do think it's worthy of a policy. What does that process look like? How do we ensure that this board is receiving, those budget amendments? What do they look like? Why did you choose that line item? Where did those expenditures go? And I would think that at least quarterly, a meeting between the boards to discuss budget performance, when you see a line item and, maybe a $7,000 line item when you're spending 15,000 isn't much. But when you go deeper into that budget and you look at the student services line item, over the last 3 or 4 years, that line item was consistently under budget, in excess of 1.5 million, sometimes 2 million. And then those funds are spent elsewhere. Now, we have no line item, this board has no line item control, but it certainly is worthy of a discussion as to budgeting practices. What are we looking for? Where are the safety nets? Student services, what you were on the Board of Education. That can be a landmine of a budget line item. But it's certainly, if we're seeing trends that go 2, 3, 4, 5 years, we probably really need to look at it a little bit more closely.
How about the city side? Same thing?
Absolutely. Our storm line item is always the one that I find to be, or the police budget salaries. We consistently try to budget that line item, hoping for a full, shift or
Robust
strength.
hiring.
Exactly, yes. And we end up with hundreds of thousands of dollars in surplus. What's the reality check for us? So, so I'm thinking, post-budget adoption, what is the amended budgets? What do those amended budgets look like? Quarterly reviews, budget performance reports, where there is actually a conversation that happens. And that brings us right back into the budget adoption period. So I think it's a good opportunity for us to look at these budgets a little more holistically, not just adopting and setting a mill rate and then receiving these reports and glancing through them, which we do. But in looking at those questions, how much has education changed? And I would even venture to say that so many of those grants, whether it's the IDA or the Perkins or the Alliance ECS funding, those are other opportunities for us to look at what's going on with those spending plans. You know, when you open up a newspaper and you read a report that says only 30% of our students are reading at proficient levels, you know, it's a conversation we should be having, you know. So food for thought on policy or a procedural manual for this board.
And should any changes be made at the state moving ECS, what we were hoping for the increase for this year being moved, and not that early childhood, because I have early childhood grandchildren, not in this district, but in other districts, that I would hope that, you know, I've got one who isn't going to be going to kindergarten kind of situation, you know.
And with those conversations happening throughout the year, we don't find ourselves in the middle of budget adoption when the legislative session is closing out, you know, where your voice gets lost.
Yeah.
You know, now this is an opportunity to formulate your appeal before the legislative session even begins. So yeah, I'll point out some of those variances and see if we can get some early answers. But I'll also ask them if they just want to prep those responses for the board when they come in March.
In March.
Yes,
Thank you, Mayor.
absolutely. Other questions on the performance report? All right, then I'm going to call this motion for the acceptance of these reports. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Item 5, I'll entertain a motion to consider business by department heads.
So moved.
Thank you, Ms. Traub.
Second.
Second by Mr. Wright. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? I'm sorry, I should have noted for the record that board member Anderson is also participating via Zoom. Thank you. All right, we're open. Mr. Monks, anything to add this evening? Talk a little bit about the audit, where you are with it, and budget development.
Mayor, his mic is off. I can't hear him.
Oh, you know what? Yeah.
So it looks like we can start with this. My apologies.
Thank you.
As far as the audit's going, we're hoping to have the preliminary trial balance to our auditing team by the end of the month. That's a
End
little,
of February?
that is a little aggressive, but there may be a few days, maybe a few days late, but no, we think it's probable that could happen. As far as the reports, we're basically, you have the reports is up to the end of December, but we are actually all caught up to date. And the next meeting, we'll be giving cumulative reports from January to the end of February for the board to review.
Thank you. We are an extension, by the way, on the audit. And I'm particularly grateful that the comptroller and deputy comptroller have been all hands on deck with the audit. Having hired our budget manager frees them up to be able to do that while she's working on budget development. That's Erica Johnson. And for the budget subcommittee, you'll see a lot of Erica over the next couple of months. And as we start to roll the budget presentations to the boards, Mr. Monks and Ms. Johnson will both be presenters.
When is the extension until?
The audit extension is till February 29th, to the end of the month. I believe we can get it by then to the auditors.
Who-
There's a,
That's the extension from the state?
The extension, yes. So we file an extension request with the state. Yes.
From to the 29th of February.
Right. So where the
But you're
state,
talking about getting the numbers to the auditor.
Correct.
That's not to the state.
that's correct.
Yes.
So do we
We-
need another extension?
We will absolutely need another
Oh.
extension. Once that trial balance, once the initial documents are to the auditors, we'll be in a better position to determine how much of an extension we will be seeking.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions for Mr. Monks?
Nothing for Mr. Monks, Mayor, but are we planning to have the budget manager also put this on the BOF meetings on her calendar moving forward? I think it would be a good participant to have.
So,
I didn't hear what he
I
said.
was going to say, I think the first couple of sentences of your request didn't come through. Could you repeat the comment or question?
Oh, sure. Are we gonna have the new budget manager attend the BOF meetings moving forward? I think it would be a good resource for us moving forward.
Yes. The plan would be not only will Ms. Johnson be available for the Board of Finance and City Council budget process, she'll also be integral to the Budget Subcommittee. She's been working very diligently, putting together, there's a brand new position. So diligently putting together not only the budget presentation, but developing a process as to how these budget documents will be presented. We're fortunate because she brings with her a number of years of experience, having done many years of budget development on the Board of Education side. So yeah, we'll definitely have her here for questions and further education. Anything from the city clerk's office this evening? Okay. Then we're going to move into item number 6, and I will entertain a motion to consider business by the mayor and members.
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Robb.
Second,
Thank you, Mr. Bass. All in favor?
Aye.
Starting to my left, anything this evening, Mr. Wright?
No, the peddler is still on the table evidently, and my other question was the Torrington Company, is that demolition going forward and is that on schedule?
So Yankee Peddler is under a 120-day due diligence phase for their pursuit of a commitment for funding. We certainly wanted the judge to make a determination that the term sheet that was presented didn't really constitute a commitment, but because the terms were so clearly defined, and the due diligence period for the mortgage company to pursue phase 1 assessment work, appraisals, and some market analysis information, he felt that it was prudent to allow them the 120 days with 30-day reports back to the city and the court.
Do you get the sense that they're more forthcoming or?
Mm.
Okay.
It's always a loaded question. Looking at what reporters are on the call, they can read the recording. Exactly. Yeah. The one thing that I will say is it's really fortunate that we have the court looking over their shoulder. I wish that those term sheets and those letters that were presented to the court on February 6th had been dated something earlier than February 1st. It kind of felt like they took 5 months to ask somebody to put something in writing on February 1. So yeah, less than reassuring, I would say.
So what
And-
is the 120 days? When did that start and when does it end?
So if 120 days started on February 6th. It will end on June 5th. The first 30 days is, I believe, March 4th. And if they don't have something absolutely unconditional in writing from a mortgage company, the term sheet they presented were actually two loans. It was a small business administration loan for, it was 5 million, and then a conventional mortgage for 1.6 million. And that, I think, rings true to all of the estimates we were receiving for redevelopment of the property.
I know the mayor can't really speak to it because it's an ongoing legal matter, but, I can tell you, Mr. Wright, that, the courts tend to always favor the defendant in these types of cases. So it's not unusual to see these continued extensions. They're always going to give the defendant the benefit of the doubt instead of the city. So it doesn't come as a shock.
And now we spent so much time on that, I forgot your second question.
The Torrington,
Torrington Company, so 70 North Street, progressing. I know, I keep waiting for that. One time I drive down North Elm Street and don't see that big building. But they are in fact making quite a bit of headway. Everything, that is a full city block. So everything behind that building that you see on Route 4 as you're driving down is coming down brick by brick, and they're picking out really focused all of those items that can be salvaged. Some of those timbers and some of that brick can be salvaged. So they're certainly moving at about the pace that they predicted they would be able to move. And the grant, which the city pursued and received on their behalf, is a pass-through grant. So we get to see all of those requests for reimbursement and photographs of progress that they're making behind the facade there. So hopefully in the next 60 days, you'll be able to see right straight through to North Street. Yeah, it's going to be weird.
Back to the peddler, is it good news that the Torrington Savings Bank, a local bank, had some kind of involvement in this, a potential involvement?
So again, the letters that were presented that seemed to be an indication that there were some financial institutions waiting in the wings were dated very late. I think February 1st was the one that was dated by Hanover. February 2nd was the one dated by Torrington Savings Bank. That letter was nothing more than a single line that said, we would be interested in talking to you about potential interest. No, I don't put a lot of stock in that. It seems to me there's a lot of work that needs to happen on that front.
Understood.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, Ms. Traub, anything this evening?
I have nothing yet.
Okay. Ms. Beskey?
Given that we were having the audit discussion, and given that there were some findings for 2022, there was talk of some new procedures needing to be in place.
Yes.
Now we're heading close to March for this year. Have we instituted some procedures that will potentially help to alleviate the need for any findings this year?
Yes, we've been enforcing internal control procedures regarding segregation of duties, who does what, things are done more timely, things are being reviewed and approved versus just put through the system. And those are the general internal controls that have been implemented. Obviously, we're going to keep reviewing and improving on a case-by-case basis.
I think the other one that I spoke to the board about that to me was new, it was a finding that we had no prior policy on, was in regard to procurement relative to the American Rescue Plan funding. So in the audit, they specifically referred us to a CFR. I can't remember the number. I know I copied it. I handed out copies to the Board of Finance members that were present at the time. And I've been reassured in our purchasing department that those new procedures are being observed for everything relative to procurement. And those are federal, so we have our local procurement policies written in our charter. There are state procurement policies which are not as stringent as our local. I mean, you can't spend more than $10,000 without going out to bid. And even anything below $10,000, our purchasing agent is looking for 3 quotes. So I think that our local procurement policies are very restrictive. But the federal requirements had another layer that wasn't used when we were pursuing a purchase through the American Rescue Plan money.
And is that, did we put that in place for July 1st?
Yes. So during the entire audit procedure, we're constantly getting feedback from the auditors. There's, have you been doing this, or they'll test us. I know Ms. Traub used to do some auditing and she's familiar with this. So you can read the tea leaves when they're asking you specific questions, and it'll send you right to that particular publication to determine whether or not there's something that we missed. That was something that was brought to our attention and to the attention of the purchasing agent immediately. And yes, those procedures have been enforced and are in place.
And the situation with us having to pay the tax collector all those additional monies, is that resolved for that year? And do you anticipate or not anticipate
So
again?
I think it's a misnomer to say we paid the tax collector for all those additional. That's not, that budget it's the tax collection budget. Though there's a line item in that budget, if you go back in the budget book and look for, it's called additions and deletions. That line item is actually the lawful corrections on the assessment.
Mhm.
So right after the reval, what happens is any piece of property that the question of the value is over $1 million is not heard by the local Board of Assessment Appeals. It is immediately referred to the Superior Court. It becomes a lawsuit. Those lawsuits can take months, they can take years. So what happened is, in the first grand list year, those properties were identified. They start to move themselves into the Superior Court. That process through the Superior Court requires lawyers and appraisals and pleadings, and there's negotiations that are going back and forth. So it isn't really until the second and third year that you actually see those corrections taking place. And during that period of time, if the taxes are continued to be paid, so they're not delinquent, and there's a determination either through mediation or through the court system that the assessment is lowered, those taxes are reimbursed back to the taxpayer or credited against the next grand list, depending on whether ownership is still the same. So to say that more money was paid to the tax collector is not how that really functions. Those are corrections to the assessment and reductions, primarily reductions to the.
And the challenge was that did not come to us to make that movement from.
When you say challenge, I'm not sure.
Well,
if you could
why
clarify.
was it cited as a problem? If that's the case, then, because we haven't been seeing the kinds of transfers that we used to see. We would get a report and it would be, we're going to move money from here to here because it's already been expended, or we know we're going to be under expended in this line. And so we want to And we haven't been seeing that.
Yes, no, so the 22 fiscal year, you did not see those.
Correct.
We left those line items, whether it was a deficit or a surplus, they were left. There were no transfers. And that's how we ended the year. We ended the year with, the deficit in that line item that reflected a correction or a lawful correction of the assessment. Fiscal year 23, you will see those line item transfers coming to this board for approval.
How soon can we expect to see that then?
It's a situation where, when these things do become available, my intent is to bring them to the board as soon as possible. If that answers your question.
And there's two schools of thoughts. The prior comptroller felt that as long as the departments weren't running a significant deficit or surplus, and you were ending your year with a surplus, that it wasn't critical to make those transfers. And in fact, it was her strategy that those deficits at year end or those surpluses in year end become highlighted. That when you're looking at your budget performance, you say, well, wait a minute, why are we ending this year with this much of a surplus? Or why did we end this year with this much of a deficit? So that as we're going through budget adoption the following year or 2 or 3
Correct.
years
So
out.
that we would have that
Correct.
institutional knowledge.
Right.
So as to know how to budget, but if we didn't do that, then we don't have that knowledge for this year.
Her thought process was by not making those line item transfers to cover that deficit, so that when you're looking at your adopted budget, you do the transfers and now you have an amended budget. You're only looking at your amended budget, not the budget performance. And if you're looking at your adopted to actual, you're seeing those deficits and those surpluses are jumping off the page. If you're looking at adopted, amended, and actual, your actual and your amended match, and you're not seeing those deficits. That was her strategy in presenting budgets. I
So-
can understand where she was going with that process. I think the challenge we have is you look at an audit and somebody who doesn't understand through the budget development and through budget performances what was going on with those line items, that they're left to question, what is this big deficit? And if they're not reading every page of the audit to say, oh, wait a minute, here's a revenue offset that clearly made sure that this, that this deficit was covered. It can be misinterpreted by the layman.
Jarring. That's a lot of money, 800, the total of 800 some odd $1,000.
Against a $1.4 million surplus. A $1.4 million surplus despite the $788,000 deficit in those line items.
Despite?
Yes.
Okay. So, but are we going to go back to seeing those, or if that's the way it's going to be, then we need to know that, and that we need to look more closely as you're talking about the amended budget versus the original adopted budget and the.
My question to add to that would be, we're talking about interdepartment transfers perhaps not being done. Are we considering, do we do departmental transfers if they're in a deficit situation or no?
So if you're looking at, for instance, another line item, we'll stay with the $788,000 question that you're asking, the jarring $788,000. In the police department, we had a surplus. We had a surplus of almost $400,000 because of the salaries. Well, we leave that alone because to your point, that is the history. Like, why did we have this surplus? If year over year over year, we continue to see vacancies of 10 and 12 police officers, you're going to see that surplus. We don't, at least I haven't authorized any of our department heads to move any of those line items, to move that surplus into any other line item.
I was thinking to another department, I guess.
At the end of the year, if we want to do something interdepartmentally, absolutely,
Okay.
that must come before this board. If we decide that, you know, there's a surplus in the storm, that was the other surplus that we had. Last year was a very mild winter and there was a significant surplus in the storm management. So if there is a complete devastation in budgeted over expenditure in one of the departments, yes, a request back to the Board of Finance for authority to transfer from the Public Works Division to this other department, you know, to cover this shortfall. Those are always presented to this board, and they have been presented this board on an annual basis. Those are done annually, not during the year or month to month. And I would think that, I mean, it's a question for this board. Those transfers, I know Mr. Wright received the last time we did those transfers, and he contacted my office and he wanted to go through every single one of them, you know, and say, well, why are we transferring this? It's also an opportunity for, if there's a surplus in the Public Works Division for storm management, and the Public Works Division wants to take that surplus and transfer it into a capital reserve account, because now you could take that $350,000 and you could put it into a capital reserve, and that might get a little more road work done, or that may get a park improvement accomplished. All of those do come to this board. But those, you know, $165,000 in the city clerk's office for recording fees, which is offset by $250,000 in recording fees that were received. No, we don't bring those back to the board.
No, because
Yeah.
this is an expense budget.
But this is the one board that looks at the whole budget. This is the one board that looks at all of your revenue and all of the expenses. So,
But when you see something like, I mean, the city clerk, that was obvious that the fees were coming in and they were on the revenue side.
right.
Okay, thank you.
And those, again, it still stays in the budget, titled additions and deletions. Those are lawful corrections that are adjudicated. So it isn't like that you come back to the Board of Finance and say, is it all right if we settle this, you know, this lawsuit? We don't have a choice. It's a lawsuit. Other questions?
And we're coming up to another reval.
So when you see your fiscal year 23, you're going to see the same thing, because there were a significant number of lawsuits, a significant number of parcels that through the appraisal services that we hire to do the grand list reval, a lot of properties decided to go the route of an assessment appeal. It's not inexpensive for them to do that. They have to hire a law firm that does it. There's one law firm, I think, if you were to go on the judicial website and look at all of the lawsuits against the city of Torrington for assessment, you're going to see the same law. You're going to see the same law firm that does that. They've become very, very good at it, and it hasn't been favorable to the city. So last year, I think it was $470,000 of lawful corrections, we're calling them, additions, deletions, in this case, deletions. In fiscal year 23, you're going to see all of that and then some. But fiscal year 24, the year we're in right now, we've already seen those drop off just in time for us to go through another reval. 10/1/2024 is a midterm reval. So, so our charge is back to the assessor's office is, you know, to scrutinize those revaluation numbers when they come in, you know, instead of just accepting what's coming in, look at them very carefully. But also, it's prudent for us in our budgeting practices in a reval year to now look at those valuations that have increased, and they're over $1 million, and they've increased, to guesstimate how many of those are going to end up as lawsuits, and how do we forecast what may become a lawful correction for us? And we're not the only municipality that's going through this. It is, like I say, 10, 15, 20 years ago, those assessment appeals were few and far between. And now almost everybody is appealing their
The
assessment.
fluctuations in property values didn't happen the way they have been happening recently, up and down.
Mm. So fiscal year 23 year end, we did a variance for our bond rating call, which was last Friday. And they're high, they're still up there. But hopefully fiscal year 24, we're back in line with what we had been budgeting, which was about $250,000 a year. We may bump that a little bit, depending on whether those last 4 lawsuits settle between now and budget adoption. But it's a challenge for us.
Can the assessment, we're going to go through the mid-cycle assessment. Can they use the information that they got from the determinations of those lawsuits to look at what they might be missing? So I don't, and I'm asking from a sense of they're spending time on legal fees. Obviously, the city has to do this as well. So, is our time better spent trying to get ahead of the cart for this one and potentially maybe not have some of those properties be in that situation? I don't know
It's
if there's
an
a-
excellent question. Yeah, it's an excellent question. And I would say yes, because in the full physical reval, which was now 5 years ago, all of those properties, a good number of them, and we ended up with over 30 assessment appeals. And I'm not sure how many ended up in legal action. But they've all been, they've been downwardly assessed. There's been a reduction. So in this, you're right, in the mid-cycle, which is a paper, it's not the full physical, it's a paper review of sales and neighboring properties. I would think very much that they're going to look at those because each one of them has been flagged. This was an assessment appeal, and the corrected assessment was reduced 20, 30%, depending on what that legal action resulted in. And I would agree, the volatility of the market, everything after 2020, the sales were astronomically inflated. Then the mortgage rates increase and they're over 7%, and there's some market correction. By 10/1/2024, that's 8 months from now, 7 months from now, I suspect there'll be even more correction. So I don't know. It's something we definitely, is a conversation we do have with the appraiser that gets hired to do that.
Mayor?
Sure. Ms. Iannacido.
My only question is, for the Board of Finance, or the Board of Education review, that we were gonna have tonight, what should we expect from that? Is it usually just a question and answer session, or will they present to us what, variances and try to explain them?
So there are 3 things that the Board of Education wishes to meet with the Board of Finance over. The first is there was a $450,000 surplus at the end of last fiscal year. They've moved $400,000 into a capital reserve. It was a motion that was made and approved by the Board of Finance last spring, if not the evening the budget was adopted, certainly the first meeting after that budget adoption. And there's still another $50,000 that they want to transfer. So that's the first one. That's a request to the Board of Finance. The Board of Finance may ask some questions back to the Board of Education. The second one is the presentation of their capital plan. So a year ago, a little over a year ago, the Board of Education presented to both the council and the Board of Finance their conditions, facilities condition assessment document. You know, that showed $40 million worth of improvements that need to be made to the school buildings. So this capital plan is built or premised on much of that conditions assessment. So I would expect that to be more of a dialogue. You know, how did you select these as a priority, and how quickly can you get these done? I know that we're still waiting for the middle school roof project to begin. So timing of everything to avoid cost escalation is just as much a part of that conversation. And then the third one, from the questions that I'm hearing this evening about their budget performance report, and I almost feel like it's more of a question of, you know, their practice of encumbering funds on day one of their budget. It's something that is new in the last maybe 3 or 4 years with the Board of Education, but encumbering those funds and then watching the performance. So that I fully expect would be more like, what are the questions the Board of Finance has regarding this budget performance report? Because I do know these budget performance reports are reviewed by the board as a whole on a monthly basis, both their budget subcommittee and their full board.
Okay.
So that one I would expect would be questions to them about this.
Okay. That's it. Thank you.
You're welcome. If there are no additional questions, as I said, Chris's. I should have started in the Zoom room. Mr. Anderson, anything this evening? Nothing. Mr. Bayes?
Nothing this evening, Mayor. Thank you.
Okay. All right. As I stated a little bit earlier, I do have our budget schedule, budget adoption schedule. I filed it with the city clerk's office this morning. I'll send an electronic version to all of the board members and to those members that will be serving on the budget subcommittee. And other than that, it's off to the races. Budget document. I spoke with Erica Johnson this morning. She's putting some finishing touches on the more expensive departments, pensions, benefits. And we hope to be able to send that electronic version out to the board members by the end of this week. So we'll kick March off with all budget, all day. All right, if there's no other question, if there are no other questions, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Move.
Thank you, Mr. Wright,
Second?
and second by Ms. Iannacido. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? I appreciate it. Thank you.